So after we finished discussion with the students from the three universities and had some feedback and comments on their presentations, I think the coming session would be also very valuable and very relevant to the discussion. Um, and so the session session 3, recommendations for education process based on practice. We have a presentation by Dr. Ossama Hegazy, um, who is an architect and interior designer and urban sociologist with extensive exposure to university partnerships. His experiences driven from Europe and Middle East, as well as the USA and Russia, teaching, publishing, and initiating global exchange projects within interdisciplinary and multicultural teams um, at the heart of his interests. He worked as an assistant professor of architecture, general coordinator of the academic development and guidance units in Imam Abdulrahman bin Faisal University, Saudi Arabia. And he also did a postdoc and PhD um, and worked as a lecturer and coordinator at the Urban Sociology Professorship Chair of Urban Sociology at the Bauhaus University, Weimar. So Dr. Osama will present insights into linguistics for a deeper understanding of architecture and urbanism. Please.
The screen has been shared or not?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Shall I present in English or in Arabic? So, I have prepared it in English, but I can speak in Arabic or in English, and for me it's no
I
problem.
think in English they will understand only if there would be any expressions that you feel it's better to mention it also in Arabic.
Okay.
Let's make it in English. I mean, I want to just encourage everybody to practice the language. That's why, yeah. So you present in English,
Okay.
and maybe you can do some clarifications in Arabic in between.
Okay, no problem at all. So thanks a lot for inviting me for the workshop, Delta City Planning, Global Issues, Local Actions. I'm very happy to be part of this event. And as we, it's not working. As we said, as we saw in the discussion you were involved in, we were too much speaking about architecture and urbanism and the relation between them. And it seems clear that there is a strong connection between architecture and urbanism. They are both dealing with spaces, functions, and forms. However, I am now thinking about linguistics, لغويات, علم اللغويات, and I'm trying to see whether we can use linguistics in order to understand architecture and urbanism. And this is a topic I'm going to present today, insights into linguistics for a better understanding of architecture and urbanism. The presentation has three main parts. First, I will start with observation, then I will move to the relation between linguistics and architecture, and then linguistics and urbanism, before coming at the end to my conclusion. So I will start with the first part, the observation. Here I will introduce the idea or the thoughts of Ludwig Wittgenstein. He is a linguistic and a philosopher of language, and he says that the limits of my language stand for the limits of my world. And here he underlines the relation between my language and my world. And here he underlines the aspect of knowledge. And as the world surrounding you creates your language and works on developing your language. And for this reason, we see that the knowledge of the surrounding creates the person. And this is through his daily life, what he do and what he experience, through his experiences. And we see these experiences reflected on his material culture. And material culture is, you can see like his clothes, how he built his buildings, and this is the material culture. But also the immaterial culture, which are, for example, his thoughts, his beliefs, how he live spiritually. These are the immaterial aspect of culture. And Therefore, he says that the knowledge comes from the surrounding, which he introduced as the milieu أو المحيط. So the milieu is responsible for creating the natural language. اللغة الطبيعية يعني اللغة الطبيعية the natural language is a language that we are speaking. It's not like, for example, IT language like or programming language like C plus or C plus plus. These are not natural language, but here we are more speaking about the natural language and how the milieu creates this natural language. So if you ask whether the built environment can also be affected by the milieu, we say yes. How? Because the milieu or the surrounding, the natural surrounding, makes you build or construct in a way which matches the aspects or the factors dominating the environment you are living in. For example, the material you are using, how you deal with the weather, and how you deal with the special condition of the space you are living in. These are all aspects which makes you build in an environmental way or to create a natural way of construction. And therefore, if we say that the milieu is responsible for the natural for creating a natural language, we can say also that the milieu is responsible for creating a vernacular built environment. So the language a result of the surrounding and the milieu. However, both of them are also subjected to development. So, for example, if you see, for example, the youth, how they use their languages, or the younger generation, how they use their language, it is different than how the elder use their language. Because the surrounding and the modern society develops, and in the same way the language get developed. For example, if we see, for example, here in Germany, they celebrate Christmas, for example, through this calendar, which is called Weihnachtskalender or the Advent calendar. And here, this board actually contains some boxes, which inside you can find some chocolates, and they are they write, for example, one, and it is the first day of the month, or 17th, it is the 17th day of the month, and the children open every day this window to take a piece of chocolate on run of the days until Christmas comes. And this is a way to celebrate this event here, this fest or this feast in Germany. And so the word, for example, Weihnachtskalender is something which is rooted in the society. Now we can see that now there are here in Germany also a Ramadan calendar, for example, which is something new and a word which is new. And this natural development get created in the society because there are modern aspects, for example, through immigration and through societal movement. So there are some new languages and some new words which get integrated to fit to the modern use of the language in Germany. And the same happens in architecture, for example, or in the built environment. We see, for example, an example of a vernacular element and how it gets developed through integrating new architectural element or the modern techniques and modern materials, which are can be seen in on the architectural level or the whole level of a region of an area or an area. So if we say for another time, so the milieu is responsible for creating a natural language, and it is also responsible for creating an vernacular built environment, and both of them are subjected to development because simply they are both dynamic. They are not static. They are much related to the changes which happen in the era, which changes that happen in the society as well. So this is the first part of the presentation. I will conclude it or summarize it by saying that in the observation, I relied on the theory or the thoughts of Ludwig Wittgenstein, who underlined the strong relation between language and word. And he say that the word and language are both a result for the knowledge, or the language is a result of the surrounding, which is the world you are surrounding you, and it creates the milieu. And both language and the built environment are very much connected with the human and environment, and they are both dynamic. I will move now to the second part of the presentation, which is a relation between linguistics and architecture. Here I will focus more on the aspect of structure. Here I mean with structure not beams and columns, but I mean the structure of spaces and the arrangement of function, for example, how they got together. And here I rely on the work of Ferdinand de Saussure. He is a linguistic specialist on structure aspects. And for him, he was very much keen about the aspect of juxtaposition. And for him, juxtaposition has the two axes. Juxtaposition in Arabic, it may be اللي هو ازاي بتتجمع او ازاي تقدر تجمع العناصر المختلفة للجملة، ازاي بتجمعوا جنب بعض، ازاي بيجي مثلا اسم وفعل وفاعل، ازاي بتجمعوا دولت مع بعض. فهنا هو بيقول ان في عندي اتنين اكسس مهمين جدا، هم دول اللي بيتحكموا في كيفية تجميع الجملة مثلا. فالاثنين اكسس دولت هم او these two axes are the syntagmatic axis and paradigmatic axis. Syntagmatic axis is a bit no choice axis, which means when you say the man cried or died or sang or whatever, you are following a very strict order. You cannot say, for example, man that died. No, you should follow this order. However, if you take the other acts, for example, you can say, for example, here you have the variety or the freedom to choose a suitable word you want. You can say the man, the boy, the woman. You can say cry, drink, whatever, which verb you want to use. So you have the option of choosing. So these two acts are very important. One, you cannot change in it, and the other, you can have a variety of choices due to the usage you want to deliver or the message you want to deliver. فمن تاني هنا النقطة دي مهمة، يعني أنت هنا بيبقى عندك في الجملة أكسين، أكس بيبقى فيه حرية في اختيار اللفظ اللي أنت عايز تقوله، اللي هو الأكس الرأسي. ممكن تقول الرجل، المرأة، الطفل، أي كلمة أنت عايز تقولها. لكن في الأكس التاني ما تقدرش تغير الترتيب بتاع مثلا الجرامر اللي فيها، لأن أنت لو غيرت فيها هتبقى الجملة مش مفهومة. يعني ما نقدرش نقول man the cried، ما نقدرش تقول كده، لكن تقدر تقول مثلا the man, the woman, the lady, the students مثلا، تقدر تغير في دي، لكن ما تقدرش تغير في الاتجاه الآخر. These two acts are very important in delivering the message you want to say. So do we have these two acts actually in architecture? This is a question which I would like to address through this part of the presentation. In order to answer this question, I refer to the work of Le Corbusier. Of course, he is one of the prominent and famous architects and theorists in architecture. And now we are going to see whether these two axes are existing in architecture through his book, Vers une architecture nouvelle, or Towards a New Architecture. He says, for example, in terms of the paradigmatic axis, which is the vertical axis. The paradigmatic axis is اللي هو الاكس الرأسي اللي فيه سهولة في الاختيار، أو إن أنت تقدر تغير في الألفاظ اللي أنت عايز تستخدمها بناء على المعلومة اللي أنت عايز تقولها. فهنا in his book, the three reminders to architects, or Towards a New Architect, the chapter 3 reminders to architecture, he was speaking first about the mass. And here he stated that our eyes are constructed to enable us to see forms in light. Primary forms are beautiful forms because they can be clearly appreciated. Yes, he says that we can use the primary form. You have the free of choice to use this form. So you are not obligated to use a type of form. No, you can choose whatever you want. He endorses using this primary form because of the context of light and shadow and this aesthetic aspects of architecture, but in base or the general issue here that you are free. You can choose whatever form you want. However, in terms of the syntagmatic acts, which is the horizontal acts, which is a bit arbitrary, we can see something different. In the chapter, the plan, that's in his just three reminded the plan, he says, for example, the plan is the generator. Without a plan, you have a lack of order. So the plan here is the type of drawings which you can see how the drawings are ordered, or the order, or is how you are making the relation between the zoning and the spaces, the different spaces. So this here you can see this horizontal act, which is in a way arbitrary. For example, in his the manual of the dwelling, you see, I will not read it all, but I will underline some aspects which can help delivering the message I want to say. We can see that he has used 9 times demand in the imperative form. يعني انت لازم تستخدم كده، اطلب كده، لازم تعمل ده. Use, for example, 6 times or 5 times how to make the zoning, how to make the relation between spaces. Several times he is stating what to do and what not to do. He even wants you to think in a specific way. He even intervened in how you teach your children. So يعني اقصد اقول هنا ان انا لو انا بتكلم على المستوى الافقي في اللغوي في تطبيقه في العماره، هنلاقي ان لكوربوسيه بيطالبك بعده اشياء اثناء عمليه التصميم المعماري للبلان. يعني بيقابلك 9 مرات بيأمرك ان انت تعمل التصميم بشكل معين، بيأمرك ان انت ازاي تفكر، ازاي بيتدخل حتى في ازاي تربي اولادك. يعني في حاطط رولز كتير جدا عشان تقدر تعمل التصميم بطريقه اللي هو شايفها المودرن اركيتكتشر، مثلا هي towards a new architecture. عشان كده نقدر نقول or for that way from this we can say that both axes, the vertical and horizontal axes, which are the pragmatic axis and syntagmatic axis, are actually existing in architecture. And therefore, we see that he states that a house is a machine to live in. It is simply a machine. And from this stand of point, we can see that the designs of architecture or interior architecture are fixed to very specific rules and are very much relying on the aspect of less is more. Although the people in reality don't live that way, they want to live in another way. They want to express their feelings. They want to share their memories. They want to feel that they are related and connected on and interacting with their houses and buildings. And this creates a paradox, which is simply the individual, how the individual is able to express himself in his buildings, in his architecture. So I conclude or summarize this part, which is the relation between linguistics and architecture, by saying that in terms of theory, I relied on the work of Saussure and Le Corbusier with the idea of juxtaposition, which consists of 2 axes, the paradigmatic axis and syntagmatic axis. And here we see that these 2 axes are actually existing in architecture and linguistics. However, despite these 2 axes, we see a paradox or a gap in terms of expressing the emotion on the individual feelings of the person in his surrounding. So now I will move to the third part of the presentation, which is urbanism and the relation between linguistics and urbanism. I will start with the work of Kevin Lynch. And Kevin Lynch is an urban planner and was keen or was researching the aspect of mental mapping. And his book, The Image of the City, is one of the prominent book in these aspects. And he researched how the people understand the city through the passes, the nodes, the landmarks, the edges, and the district. He states that at every instant, there is more than the eye can see, more than the ear can hear. Nothing is experienced by itself, but always in relation to its surroundings and meanings. And here I underline meaning. So it's not only about mental mapping and how the people perceive the cityscape, but it is also about the meaning. And when it comes to meaning, then we need to think about how the people interpreted these elements. So it is about more about the interpretation. So through the interpretation, we can reach the meaning. However, these aspects that Kevin Lynch underlined, and district, the node, the landmark, are not enough to understand how the people perceive the meaning or interpreted the signs of the city. And therefore there is a shortage in these aspects, which drove me to uh, underline the work of Peirce, which is a linguistic also and a philosopher, because he was more keen to research how the people understand science in a science which is called semiotics. Semiotics أو بالعربي السيميوتيقا هي علم يدرس الرموز، ازاي الإنسان يقدر يفهم الرموز أو ازاي الناس بتتفاعل مع الرموز وتفهمها ازاي. ف For him, he stated that nothing is a sign unless it is interpreted as a sign, which means here the interpretation is the key factor for delivering meaning. So يعني أنا لما يكون عندي علامة معينة أو sign، العملية اللي بتحصل أو البروسيس اللي بيحصل عشان تفهم الساين ده، هو ده اللي بيقدر يخليك تفهم معنى الساين أو الكلمة دي. طيب how we can understand the sign. So for example, if I give this word Egypt, how we were going to understand it? And note that Egypt here is a sign. It is an acoustic sign. For example, when I say Egypt, it is an acoustic sign. So how you are going to understand it? يعني أنا دلوقتي لما أقول كلمة Egypt أو مصر، فكلمة مصر دي أنت بتسمعها بتبقى عبارة عن sign acoustic، يعني صوتية، يعني ساين، مش شايفه ساين بالعربي دي، يعني هي ساين صوتيه، فانت ازاي هتقدر تفهمها الساين الصوتيه ديت؟
ممكن
اشاره صوتيه،
اشاره ممكن او علامه.
صح كده؟ معلش انا اسف. So it is an acoustic sign, and how we are going to understand it? Maybe you can understand it as the pyramids. Some other might understand it as Kulthum. Other would say it as understand it as Abdul Basit or Muhammad Salah, or they will think about World Cup, or to think that if it's about the World Cup, so I might think about Russia. So here I started with a simple sign, but the meaning of this sign has several signification, which means the people will not understand it in the same way. And also you can start with Egypt and end up with Russia. يعني انا لما اقول الاشاره الصوتيه دي اللي هي الاكوستيك ساين دي، لما اقول انا مصر، في واحد ممكن يفهمها ان هي كلثوم، واحد يفهمها انها عبد الباسط، واحد يفهمها اي حاجه ثالثه، او يفهمها بمضامين ثانيه تخليني انطلق من كلمه اللي هي مصر في الاخر وصلتني ان انا بفكر في روسيا. يعني معنى كده ان مش معنى ان انا بحط ساين في مكان معين ان كل الناس هتفهمها بنفس الحاجه، ومش معنى كده ان هي هتقدر توصل بيها لمعنى فعلا عن مصر. لما اقول مصر، لا، انت ممكن توصلك لمكان تاني خالص 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 ملوش علاقه اصلا بمصر. وده بنسميه حاجه بتتسمى ايه؟ ان كل المسج will lead you to another sign. Every sign can lead you to another sign, which is a process which is called infinite regression. And this infinite regression causes the polysemy of the meaning, which means يعني ان انت لما بيبقى في انحصار لا نهائي للكلمات التي او الساينز اللي ليها علاقه بالساين الاوليه اللي انت قلتها، وبتخلي البوليزمي اللي هو تعدد معاني الكلمه. That a word might have several meanings. And here comes the question, how to control polysmy? And this is a very key aspect. And as, for example, in the previous discussion, we were speaking about the context. And the context is the key factor which makes the meaning really reach what you want to deliver. يعني من خلال المحتوى بتقدر ان انت توصل المينينج بتاعك. يعني لما اتكلم عن مصر مثلا، اقول لك انا بتكلم عن مصر في مجموعه اصدقاء مثلا قاعدين مع بعض بيتكلموا عن مصر مثلا في اطار الكوره، فساعتها هتقدر تقول ان في اطار الكوره ده لما هيتكلموا عن مصر هنقدر نوصل مثلا ده ممكن يكون حاجه ليها علاقه بمحمد صلاح، ليها علاقه بالاهلي والزمالك، ليها علاقه بالحاجات دي. فايه الكونتكست ده حدد لك المعاني اللي ممكن الكلمه دي تكون بتوصلها. كل ما بيوسع الكونتكست كل ما تكون المعاني بتزيد، وكل ما تقدر تقلل الكونتكست بتاعك وتحصره في حاجه معينه هتقدر تخلي المسج بتاعتك اوضح. فهو اهم حاجه لما تيجي توصل الميننج بتاعك ان انت يكون الكونتكست بتاعك very accurate and very clear. And therefore if for example the context is very responsible for delivering the meaning you want to say. And in linguistics we use several techniques in order to deliver this context. For example, here it was the best of time, it was the worst of time. The technique which is used here is parallelism. يعني الباراليزم اللي هو انت بتاخد نفس الاستراكشر بتكرره اكتر من مره، فبيكون الاستراكشر بتاع اللغه هنا parallel. او for example ان انت بتستخدم كلمات متضاده ان هي يكون في opposite meanings, best and worst. So, and we also use the same in the built environment. We can, for example, see here we are having, instead of parallelism, for example, we have symmetric structure. يعني parallel structure ممكن تقدر توصله في العمارة أو في الurban عن طريق إن أنت بتعمل symmetric design, for example. Or we are using the opposite in linguistics. In architecture, for example, we use the contrast, for example, between solid and void, shadow and light. So we are actually using the same techniques. Even in linguistics, we can use something which is called alteration, which is repeating the same structure several times. And in architecture, we also do the same by repeating the same structure of architecture several times in order to be sure that we are delivering the message we want to underline. يعني من تاني بالعربي، يعني ان احنا مثلا في اللغويات بتقدر تستخدم بعض الاساليب عشان تكون في الكونتكست بتاعك واضح. ازاي مثلا ان انت تقدر تستخدم اللي هو التوازن في الجمله، او ان انت تستخدم التضاد. احنا دايما كنا بناخد في العربي زمان ايه التضاد يبرز المعنى ويقويه مثلا ويؤكده. فدي اساليب بنستخدمها في اللغويات، او ان انت تكرر نفس الاستراكشر اللي انت بتستخدمه في اللغه تقدر تكرره اكتر مره عشان تاكد على ايه، على المعلومه اللي انت عايز تقولها. فنفس التكنيكس دي بنقدر نستخدمها برضه في العماره او في البناء. ازاي ان انا بقدر استخدم مثلا لو هو حاجه متوازيه ممكن اقدر استخدم الاسس التصميميه اللي هي زي السيمتريك ان هو يكون متماثل، او ان انا بستخدم الكونتراست او اللي هو بتاع الكونتراست تضاد عن طريق الضوء والظل، عن طريق السوليد والفويد، عن طريق البارز والغائر. جميل. او التكرار ان انت بتقدر تكرر نفس السيستم اللي انت واخده مثلا، او بيكون زي هنا بنسميه زي التايب او الستايل اللي انت شغاله المعماري، بتقدر تكرره اكتر من مره بحيث ان انت تاكد على المسج بتاعتك. So through context we can reach the meaning we want to deliver, and we can go further than that by delivering a narrative. So once we reach the context, we can design the signs we want to use in order to create a narrative. For example, like here for the Jewish Museum, for example, we are using as a type of opening in a very irregular way in order to underlie the Holocaust, confusion, and disorientation. So through this kind of signs, which are the windows and the openings, we are trying to deliver a message and to create a narrative for them. Not only from the facades, but also in the interior design. You are using the same way in order to underline the suffer and pain and fear of the Holocaust. In the urban space or the public space, we are also using the same through. For example, the floor is not flat, but it is very irregular and unbalanced to deliver a message of disorientation. And this is all to make the building or the built environment in the urban touches the human and to make him feel and understand the message the design has done. من تاني هنا يعني انت في الاخر بتحاول يعني كان في سؤال عن ايه هو دور المعماري. يعني انا ممكن يكون حسن رد على الدكتور حسن رد على الموضوع ده بطريقه اكتر فوكس على التكنيكال اسبيكتس. انا هنا بفكر في الموضوع بطريقه مختلفه. انا بفكر ان هو اي انت منشأ بتبنيه او بتحاول ان انت تعمله ديزاين، انت مش بتبني المبنى زي ما هو حسن بيقول قلبه كان بيوصح، انت بس مش بتعمل حاجه الفيزيكال او حاجه اللي انت بترسمها اللي ملموسه اللي هي الاوبجكتيف. لا، ده في حاجه سبجكتيف وراها، يعني في فكره انت بتوصلها ابعد من مجرد حيطه او ازاز او خشب. لا، انت بتحاول توصل فكره معينه. الفكره اللي انت بتوصلها دي ازاي هيفهمها الانسان ده، ازاي هتاثر في المجتمع، ازاي هتاثر في الاربن بتاعك. فبتكون مسج متكامله. ويعني ايه متكامله؟ يعني المسج دي على المستوى الانتيريور اركيتكتشر، على مستوى الاركيتكتشر، على مستوى الاربن، وعلى مستوى الاربن ديزاين والاربن ديفلوبمنت بعد كده. لان هي انت في الاخر بتعمل حاجه الانسان هيتعامل بيها وهيتعامل معاها وهتاثر على سلوكه. فازاي انت تقدر تعمل حاجه فعلا تبقى اي بروجريسيف، تزود النولج بتاعت الناس، تزود الاكسبيرينس بتاعت الناس، تزود التعامل او انتر اكشن ما بين الناس والبيلدنج اللي انت بتعمله ده. ده هو مفهوم الأكبر لفكرة العمارة. يعني العمارة مش أنت بس مبنى أنت بتبنيه، لا، ده في علاقة ما بين المبنى ده واللي حواليه، واللي حواليه ده مش بس مباني، لا، ده اللي حواليه ده كمان أكتر ناس، والناس هي الأكتر هتتعامل بيه، هتتعامل معاه. ف I summarize this part. So here I was working on the aspect of the relation of urbanism and linguistics. I underlined the work of Kevin Lynch and Pierce and the importance of interpretation of signs and dealing with the built environment as signs which have meanings. And these meanings might be exposed to polysmy, which is the several interpretation and meaning embedded in a sign, and how to be sure that the sign will be understood in a way you want or the design has created. And this is through the context. And once we reach the right context, we can actually deliver a narrative through this building. So now I come to the conclusion and last part of my presentation. And so in the beginning, I spoke about the insights into linguistics for a better understanding of architecture and urbanism, and that was the key aspect of my presentation and the focus of my presentation. In terms of theories, I used several theories. The first of Ludwig Wittgenstein in terms of observation and the relation between language and world. Then I moved to architecture in terms and used the theory of Saussure and Le Corbusier, and underline the aspect of juxtaposition. And at the end, I worked on Kevin Lynch and Pierce for urbanism and underline the aspect of interpretation. So in terms of application, we saw that the milieu or the knowledge are a very key factor in terms of creating language and vernacular architecture, natural language and vernacular architecture. Both language and architecture or the built environment has or have the pragmatic and sigmatic axis, which is horizontal and vertical axis. The first is the free of choice of forms, and the other is the rules that we should follow, which are the grammatical rules, for example, in order to deliver a sentence. And at the end, I underlined the aspect of the meaning of signs, how these meanings might be interpreted in a very different way depending on the person who receives the message and how his background can interpret a message in a different way than someone else. In terms of finding, I underline that languages and built environment are both very much related to the human and the environment, and they are both dynamic. Both languages and built environment have a gap in terms of expressing the individual emotion and feelings, and at the end, the context is responsible for making a sign interpreted in a right way, and through context we can deliver a message and a narrative. So at the end, I say that I perceive architecture and urbanism not a distinct body or a knowledge from linguistics, so they are not different field, or which don't have too much in common. Indeed, architecture, urbanism, and linguistics have a lot of common grounds because both of them are simply human expressions. Thanks a lot, and if you have any question, I welcome your questions.
Thanks a lot, Ossama, for this. I would call it a philosophical, intellectual approach doing this comparison between linguistics and architecture and urbanism. And actually, yeah, I had a side discussion with Sarah, who mentioned the milieu Schutz here in Germany, which is protecting the urban context, I think, which is also like can help us somehow to consider the existing milieu and respond to it, or react accordingly. So not to ignore the context, but even and sometimes we have to preserve it, respect it. Yeah, and there is a comment from Professor Ahmed Suleiman. He says it's a very interesting as academic work, but the meaning of the built environment discussed by Amos Rappaport, while the meaning of the context explored by Christopher Alexander in his book Pattern Language. So he's asking if you would please explain the linkage between these two authors and their ideas and the issues that you have explored. I'm sure Christopher Alexander and I mean his pattern language and considering the building process as a ritual and as a collective kind of expression that reflects the beliefs and values of the community, and also Amos Rappaport, who talked a lot about human aspects in design and culture in design. I mean, because my main PhD research was about culture and urban development, so I'm also exposed to those two I would say thinkers. So can you link somehow to your presentation or your how to say it, الطرح hello?
I'm reading the comment of Professor Ahmed Suleiman now.
Dr. Ossama, it was very interesting lecture.
شكرا جزيلا ليك دكتور بروفيسور.
I enjoy it.
وشكرا لسؤالك. انا بحاول اقرا
لقيت الكومنت طيب؟
لقيته اصلا اول مره اتعامل مع الزوم، فبالنسبه لي شويه صعب. فبحاول ان انا يعني ايه اكتشفه. فانا اكتشفت دلوقتي فينا الاقي الكومنت وبحاول اقراه دلوقتي اهو. ثواني. context. أنا الصراحة I don't have too much experience on the work of Amos Rapport and Alexander, but I have my experience in other aspects, and I'm trying to answer the question according to my readings and the background, the academic background I have in these two aspects. So here, the question about the built environment and the context. So the built environment here, I will answer it. It's the sign itself, because the built environment is actually, or the urban fabric is. So I will just write by my side here to know about what I'm speaking about, the built environment and the context. Okay. Okay. Oh. So, well, what's happening? So, Professor Ahmed, thanks a lot for the question. So the question is more about the connection between the built environment as such and the context. So the built environment as such is signs. So, for example, if we say it is a landmark, it is a normal building or a public space or whatever. So it is at the end, these aspects are signs. And how we interpret these signs, you need a context. So without the context, you cannot interpret it as sign. And at the end, the context is the driving force which gives the values to the sign. So without context, you cannot have a meaning. So I don't know whether this answers your question or not, but I see it as that way. So you need a context. Without a context, you cannot interpret it.
I would say maybe add Ossama to this. There's no contradiction between your approach and what Dr. Suleiman meant by mentioning Christopher Alexander. And I mean, yeah, pattern language is basically, for those who don't know, maybe I'll try to explain it. It's like patterns, you know, the pattern, it's nasaq, which is certain thing that is repeated in a way, like you can find it in different places. So it is pattern, and it's meant to be like to explain how the space used by people can be considered as a pattern. So there is always a pattern. For example, like in Egypt, عربية الفول اللي على الناصية والناس واقفين ياكلوا فول حواليها. And it is repeated wherever in Egypt. You can find this the full like beans street vendor with the wooden cart and people eating around. So this is one pattern. Wherever you find wide stairs, for example, people sit on those wide stairs and watching a plaza. Or so this is another pattern. So I think compared to the semiotics and the sign language, when you see this pattern, you understand that this is you know how it works. You know how based on your experience and knowledge from other places, you can understand, okay, this is the way this space would function, because this is the pattern in this context. Because sometimes also it's different from a city to another, from a country to another. Yani, I don't know if عربية الفول we can find it in Egypt, but maybe in other countries you find something else. In Germany you would find currywurst, for example. So
okay. Hassan, let me give you an example.
Please.
House of Parliament in Lebanon. If you notice the design of the interior of the House of the Parliament, you find that the government is stand in front of the opposition. Okay?
Mhm.
And in the Egyptian Parliament, there is no opposition, all sitting together. That is the meaning of the place. It is a democracy and non-democracy environment. That is the meaning. That is the meaning. As well, in British Parliament, the government in front of the opposition. That is, it is reflecting the democracy in this country. If we're talking about the difference between places and spaces, for example, Meydan Tahrir in Cairo, it is reflecting the meaning of the January Revolution now. But in old time, it was reflecting the Fido Ismail period. That is the meaning of a place. So if we lose this meaning, we'll lose our history. We have to sustain the meaning of the place itself and the effect of space on the place.
Thanks, Dr.
I
Suleiman.
might say here something about the meaning, as you say, for example, of the Square Tahrir or any other building, it depends on the time as well. So the epoch or the era you are speaking about, for example, Khidiwi Ismail, or now in terms of Meydan Tahrir, it changes, and this is normal because the discourse is different. So the beginning was in a context that had a meaning, and now the context is different because the context is as well subjected to development and change. It's not fixed. So here you are speaking, I think, about more Foucault and the discourse and the power of the space and the interpretation of the space according to the discourse. Now the discourse of Meydan Tahrir is different than the discourse of Meydan Tahrir at the time of Al-Khidawi. And that's why if we make it a fixed interpretation of the space, this is unachieved, and this is what Ronald Barthes called the myth. It is a myth. You cannot stop the time. We cannot stop the time and say this square will be always interpreted and understood that way. That cannot happen, and it is the same aspect, for example, for the society. The society is dynamic and changes.
Exactly. The society has a history.
Yes,
and the Triumph in Paris.
Yeah, but the history, it depends. Here there is a very crucial point, because the history, yes, the history will not change. What happened is happened, but how we interpreted the history, this is subjected to change, because the power, according to Foucault, is the aspect or the driving force for interpreting the actual events. And with the time, the power changes, and therefore the interpretation will also be changed. It doesn't mean that what the interpretation now is right or wrong, because I believe that there is no right or wrong. I believe that everything will be interpreted according to the knowledge we have in a certain time, in a certain Zeitpunkt here, they say, in a certain event. Yeah. So it is not any.
It is interesting discussion, but I disagree with you that still the place reflecting the history of a place and the history of the state. If you go back to Islamic Cairo, when they started to link between Islamic Cairo and the modern place of Cairo, which is now Medan Tahrir and Khidewi area. It is reflecting the power of this time and move
Uh,
different period to reach to modern history. And even Janata Burlog talk about this point.
Yes, I agree with you that the space reflects the history.
He be able to abolish the history.
No, no, no. It reflect. It of course it reflects the history.
The triumph still as it is, but the memory of the design of Arc de Triomphe is still in the memory of French people. It is gated. It is,
I think there's no contradiction between different points of view, and I think it's a very intellectual discussion that we are going through right now. That might be. I hope that the students. I mean, I'm getting some comments that amazing presentation, very interesting point of view. I loved the presentation. So this is coming from Mansoura. Kafr Sheikh, I mean, from different universities. And there is Muhammad Samir is raising his hand actually a long time ago. Sorry for يعني إيدك وجعتك أكيد. So please ask your question. But this will be the last question. Then we will move to Engineer Muhammad Abu Samr.
Okay, first, thank you for a great and interesting presentation. But I need to know the relationship between architecture and linguistics. Is that with Le Corbusier side only because of other theories or other sides of architects is deposit of Le Corbusier or in another side? I need to know the relationship between architecture and linguistics deeply.
No, it's not exclusively for Le Corbusier, but I underlined Le Corbusier because of his idea of structuralism, and he was very keen on this aspect of how we manage and arrange the space, and also as a key figure in modern architecture. But it's not only exclusively for Le Corbusier. But until now, we still have rules when we speak, for example, on the horizontal axis of arrangement, which is, as I said, a way arbitrary, and we cannot change a lot in it. So we still, until now, follow some rules when we speak about zoning, for example. If we go to any architecture project and you become, first you see the program, which is what you need to do, for example, a culture center, you need an area for entrance, you need an area for communication with the client, and how the accessibility to the building, and how you move from a zone to the other. So we have certain rules, and these rules you are in a way forced to follow. So we still have this aspect in architecture. So at the level of zoning and relations, and for example, where we get light and where we need to put some function which are most relevant to receiving as much as possible light, where to put function which are irrelevant for natural light, for example, and for ventilation, and how to have natural ventilation, or these aspects are all subjected to rules, and the rules we follow, and we cannot change a lot in this aspect. And therefore, this horizontal axis does exist in architecture, whether it is a modern architecture, postmodern, whatever. So it does exist. So that is how I perceive it.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Ossama Hegazy, for this food for thought. And I think probably it's a new concept for many of our participants, and I'm sure that this would help them later to perceive architecture in a different way. And probably tomorrow this would be also clear in our discussions. So thanks a lot, and let's.
I just would like to thank you all, and thank you for the invitation, and thanks all the participants for the nice messages and chats they sent us. Also, I would like to thank Professor Ahmed very much for his question and comments, and I hope that we stay in contact for further discussion. Thank you all.
Inshallah.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan, and we would like to have your presentation on the website.
Inshallah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Hassan, just a question. Are we going to have another discussion after that, or there is no discussion before the break?
There will be some of a discussion. I mean, Abu Samra, he has an idea to keep the presentation not very long, and then we will have discussion with the participants.
Okay, so I will stay. So just want to know whether I will stay or not.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have engineer Muhammad Abu Samra. Actually, he's an architect, urban planner, and urban development expert with more than 26 years of experience. His main focus areas are appropriate architecture and urban planning, sustainable urban and community development, integrated development, as well as housing and urban upgrading. He gained his wide experiences in various fields, including housing on all levels, planning new cities, upgrading informal and historical areas, architectural design, adaptive reuse, urban design, and placemaking, capacity building for local administration, and integrated development. He actually worked previously at the UN Habitat Egypt, managing 4 projects and leading housing and urban upgrading program. He also has worked at the participatory development program at the GIZ Egypt, and with several architecture and urban planning firms in various responsibilities. That's why, yeah, which led to his wide range of experience. So thanks, Engineer Abu Samra, and he will present urban regeneration approaches and practical skills. So you can.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan, for this introduction. Allow me to share my screen. Okay. First, allow me to make a short. I mean, the presentation is long, a little bit long, but I tried to skip some parts and give the presentation to you to read it thoroughly afterwards, so that I leave as much as possible space for discussions. So we're talking now about the urban regeneration approaches and practical skills. The presentation will be in 3 parts. The first part is the conceptual framework, and then the elements of urban context and approaches. And then the third part will be executive framework of methodologies and tools. So the conceptual framework, so we have some basic definitions that maybe most of you know them, but we have to differentiate between urban regeneration and urban upgrading, planning and urban planning, urban development, local economic development, integrated development, sustainability. In this regard, I'll tell you how I started practicing my career since 1994.